OpenAI has a few large language models, but the one I found to be the most profound, the one that has the biggest impact measured in terms of actual contribution or productivity multiplier, has also got to be one of the best kept secrets. It's called GitHub Copilot Chat, and it's such an underrated tool when you consider that pretty much all of the attention that OpenAI get is for the GPT-3 and GPT-4 models, the ChatGPT products. These are all very impressive, but pound for pound, GitHub Copilot Chat can instantly double your productivity if you write code for a living. You may use the GPT plugin to help provide some grammar assistance when you're writing a breakup message to your girlfriend, or to help you learn a language using a custom syllabus, or create a daily journal system that you can query using natural language. But let's be honest, you probably won't be doing that very often, and these are 3-minute tasks. If you're a software engineer, you write code every single day, and that's a solid 5 to 10 hours of your day for the next 30 years of your life. So let's take a look at how we can double our productivity doing something that literally pays for our bills. Right? So first thing first, you need to be using Visual Studio Code Insiders. On my screen, you have this Visual Studio Code Insiders. Not the vanilla Visual Studio Code, but the one called Visual Studio Code Insiders. Now you could hop over to download this or build it from source. If you're comfortable with that, then you're gonna install this extension called Copilot Chat published by GitHub. You go to extension and you search for GitHub, or you could just search for Copilot Chat. And this is the one you want to be installing. Okay, it will have the pre-release tag. So click on the install button here and wait for it to complete. Now this extension is called GitHub Copilot Chat. OpenAI itself has the Codex model, which is a language model trained on code. And GitHub uses this OpenAI Codex model to build something like a pair programmer that you can talk to, that live in your code editor, and it can correct your code, it can write tasks for you while you're writing code. And I mentioned that you could build a diary bullet journal system that you can query in natural language, and that's something I did in my last video. So let me pull up that code for you. This is journal.py. I have a video dedicated to this if you want to go and watch how to build your own GPT journal. Go and watch that video. But if you're just following along, you can also just hop over to my large language model repo and just do a git clone to pull down that code, and you would have exactly this. So make sure you want to activate that. After you install the extension, you want to activate that. It may ask you to reload the window, just do that. And then you will now have this GitHub Copilot on your activity bar. If this is the first time you're opening this, it may ask you to log in with your GitHub account, so just do that. And now you can do some pretty amazing things with GitHub Copilot Chat. So let me demonstrate that. Right now I have this journal.py, it's just a standard Python file. It's nothing really complicated here, about 113 lines of code. So what I will do is I'm going to go and highlight a few lines of code, maybe from here all the way up here. Now let's say I'm trying to do some code reviews here. Somebody sent me this code and I'm trying to understand this. But let's say I'm relatively new to Python and I'm not really sure what this is. So what can I do with GitHub Copilot Chat? Now I would highlight that, and there's two ways you could activate this. So one is to right click, and in here there is the Copilot. You could say explain this. So that's the first way to do that. So if you do it, it would say /explain, and it's gonna say thinking. And now GitHub Copilot is gonna try to explain this set of code here from line 32 to 49. All right. So let's take a look at this. And also, by the way, it gives you that if you were to right click and say GitHub Copilot and then explain this, it just does the short form for you, /explain. You could ask in natural language and say, please explain this line of code, explain the highlighted code, you could say that. But really, this is, I mean, if you want to type that out, that's all by all means. But really it's saying that you could actually just put a slash and then put /explain. So that's one of the built-in shortcode. /explain, the command here says, it explains step by step how the selected code works. Alright, so you don't have to type out the whole thing and say, please explain this highlighted piece of code, but instead you could just do /explain and it would do that for you. So the code reads in as file specified by the file path. Alright, so that's what we have here on line 32. We say that we've opened file path and we put a quotation R stands for read, so W stands for write, R stands for read. And the file is read in as a string using the open function and the with statement, which ensures that the file is properly closed after it's read. So if you don't want to use the with open, this is a context manager. If you don't want to use this context manager, another way to do that is to do a open, then you do a read, then once you're done processing, do a close. A more Pythonic, a more modern way of running that is to just use a context manager like a with statement. So that is what's being explained here, right? And then it says that the contents of the file are then passed to the markdown.markdown function. Now this markdown is basically describing here, right? This converts the markdown formatted text to HTML, and the resulting HTML is then parsed using the beautiful SOAP. So now it's explaining line 34 and 35. Then it says that the code then searches for all of the p tags and the HTML using the find all method of the SOAP object. It filters the resulting list of p tags to only include those that contain at least 2 pipe characters. So this is what I'm doing here, right? I'm trying to find all of the p tags, and then I'm trying to find the p if p tags count any any paragraph, any p-tag paragraph that contains this character more than once, so at least 2 characters. So it gets all of this and it explains that. So overall, the Codex reads in the file, converts its contents from Markdown to HTML, extracts a specific piece of text from the resulting HTML, and it prints the text to the console. Because we stopped here, we did not. I don't think we passed in the result. It also tries to be helpful. It says possible ways to improve the code with respect to readability and performance include this: adding comments, using more descriptive variable names. So realize that I'm using P, maybe it doesn't like P. It says you could have tried something else, use something more descriptive. And it also suggests that you use the try except block to handle errors that may occur. So instead of doing all of this with open, you could maybe take one of the suggestions and say, well, improve this code using a try except block, and take it up on a suggestion, and it will try to do that for you. So it says, okay, well, certainly here's an updated version of the code that uses a try except block to handle errors that may occur when reading in the file. So instead of actually doing the with open, it says, well, you could do this instead. And if you like this, you could copy that, or you could insert this at cursor. So I could highlight all of this and I just bring this over to the cursor, and it just brings everything in here. I'm going to reverse that, but it has that function, right? You could also take all of this and insert this into a new file. You could run that in a terminal to make sure the code actually runs before you put it in here. And notice that it's actually proactively giving you more suggestions. You say you can also further optimize the regular expression to remove any unwanted characters from the text. So again, you can just click on it to continue taking it up on its suggestion. But since I've done that already, I'm going to instead show you how to use the natural language query instead. So I'm going to say, well, maybe how can we make it more concise? How can we make this code more concise? Let's see if it understands that and give us something. So what does it say? One way to make this code more concise is to combine some of the steps into a single line of code. Here's an updated version of the code that does this. So let's take a look at the difference between what we wrote and what they suggest here. So the with open is the text read, and instead of doing HTML and SOAP and the PS and P, what it does is that it just put everything together into one line of code. I don't know if I prefer that. Honestly, I think it may look a little bit too deeply nested for my liking, but it does the markdown in here, then it wraps into beautiful SOAP, and then it does the P for P. So basically the list comprehension, this is a tuple instead, and then it used the next, which is to find one, basically take the first one. If P is none, then say no matching paragraph. Otherwise, just do nothing, just return, and then finally use the result re.sub that's there, and then finish processing. So that's one way to do it. And what's interesting is that even without highlighting this, so let me take my cursor out, let me put it on this line. So I'm putting my cursor on line 29. I'm not actually doing any highlighting anymore, but because this is a chat interface, it actually remembers the context. So I can continue to ask it regarding, so let's say this one, re.sub, right? I want to say, what is the point of that re.sub call? So I'm not putting my cursor on anything here, but I'm chatting with it here. Now, if it's smart enough, it would remember that this is our conversation. So when I'm talking about re.sub, I'm referring specifically to this line that it produced for me. So let me hit enter on that. And you see that sure enough, it still gets that we're still in the context of the conversation, that I'm actually asking for this, and this is a follow-up to this question here, right? So the re.sub method call is used to remove all characters before the first pipe character in the text of the selected p tag. This is done using a regular expression that matches any sequence of characters that does not include a pipe character at the beginning of the string. So this basically tries to explain what is in here. So anything in here, and then this is the r-sub. So it tries to explain this process, then it gives you a summary of that. The purpose of this step is to extract a specific piece of text from the markdown formatted file that is being processed. And even when my cursor is out there, it understands that I'm not referring to any other code but this particular line of code. And I feel like this itself puts it head and shoulders above a generic GPT-3 model that doesn't have the visibility into the context of your code, right? Where you have to, I mean, you can actually copy all of this and paste it into GPT-3. But look at this. This is natively in here, and it understands your code, it understands the questions, it holds the context together, and you can keep following up and maybe even ask more questions. You can even ask, you can say add more comments. Since this is one of the suggestions it gave us anyway, one of the suggestions it gave you was to add more comments to explain the purpose of each step. So I could say add more comments throughout this function to help readability. So I don't want to add comments for the sake of it. I want to make sure if you're adding comments, it makes it easy for people to read through this function. So I'm going to just hit enter on that and let's see what it says. So it says, suddenly here's an updated version of the read journal MD function with additional comments. So now, instead of just having the with open, it says read in the contents of the file, convert the markdown formatted text to HTML, create a beautiful soap object from the HTML, find out p tags, filter the list of p tags to only include the first one or anything more than one. If there's no matching p tags, just print an error, and then so it does all of that. And it explains its logic here. In this version of the code, each step of the function is accompanied by a command that explains what it does. And this should make the code easier to understand for someone who's not familiar with the details of the implementation. So you understand that my objective is to make it more readable, make it more comprehensible for people who are maybe not very familiar with this piece of code. Now we can also do some serious refactoring with Copilot Chat. I can highlight, let's find a line of code. Let's say this one, okay? Let's just highlight this one. Now, I'm not familiar, if I'm new to Python, I'm not familiar with this kind of syntax here. This is a list comprehension, P for P in PS, if P tags. So I'm not familiar with that, and I prefer not to see that for whatever reason, right? So I could hit Control I to explain it. I could also just right click and then just say start code chat, all right? So either Control I to just the shortcut, or just do a start code chat, right click, and then it says ask Copilot to do something, or type / for topic. So I could again go back to explain. I could do this, but I don't want that. What I want it to do is to reformat the whole thing. I don't want it to explain. I know what it does. I just prefer not to have that. All right. So I could say, you know, find a better way of writing this. Without the list comprehension. So for whatever reason, I just don't want it. Okay. So let me do that. Now watch this. I'm gonna hit enter. Now you have a reformatting. Let me actually bring this to the side so you can compare them. You see the minus here, meaning remove these 3 lines of code and adding these 5 lines of code. And so what you have here is P equals to P for P in PS. That is all gone now. Instead, for tag in PS, if tag count is more than that, P equals to tag. And then now you don't need this anymore because you're just having 1. And it gives you a few suggestions here. You could either discard this. You say, no, I don't want that change. You could toggle the difference view. This is the git diff. You don't want a git diff, you can toggle that on and off. You could turn it back on. You could thumbs up, you could thumbs down. Now, if your ego can take it, you can also ask Copilot Chat to critique your code and tell you why you're horrible at your job. You do this by typing into the chat, am I a bad programmer based on the code I wrote in this file? You could ask it that, but I'm not prepared for that. I'm not prepared for the answer, so let's not actually do that. Instead, we can say something like propose a bug fix, or propose a fix for the bugs in my code. Let's see. This is kind of asking the same question. Earlier, it's like, you know, am I good at my job? Am I competent at my job, right? Now I'm saying that propose a fix for the bugs in my code. Let me just hit enter and let's see what it says. All right, let's take a look. Now, based on the code excerpt you provided, it looks like there are no obvious bugs. However, there are a few things you could consider changing to improve the code. All right, that's good. So it means that our job is probably safe and means that we're probably competent. All right. The p tag variable, the p variable is a list of p tags that contains at least 2 characters. If there are multiple matching p tags, the code will only extract the text from the first one. Depending on use case, you may want to modify the code to extract the text from all matching p tags. So it doesn't really understand the point I'm doing that, so I'm okay. This is a good advice, generally speaking, but in my case, I know what I'm doing. I actually only want the first one, so I can safely ignore that. It gives you this suggestion. It doesn't say that there's a block. In fact, it says that there's no obvious blocks, okay? Then the resub, this is the regex sub. Method call uses a regular expression to remove all characters before the first pipe character in the text. However, this assumes that the desired text is always located after the first. This is correct. This is a very safe assumption. My desired text is always gonna be located after the first pipe. So if this is not the case, the regular expression will need to be modified to match. Again, this is not super helpful as well because I know exactly what I want and this assumption is always going to be correct. I always assume that my desired text would always be after the first pipe character. And the reason for that is I'm doing this with a markdown table. If you ever seen a markdown table, right, this is my name, this is my age, so on and so forth. But you see that the markdown table would always start from that. And so because of that, I know that this assumption is always going to be true. It gives you another one, the create journal notes here, this one. It's not used in the code except you provided, so it's unclear whether there are any bugs in that function. If you encounter any issues with that function, feel free to provide me more details and I can help you debug it. You want to read them, but you don't want to mindlessly accept them, right? You don't want to mindlessly accept anything that it suggests. In fact, the first time before I record this video, I was playing around with it, I was doing a few other things, and it gave me a few suggestions. Again, it makes suggestions. And sometimes those are very strongly worded, very convincing, and you may think that that is actually a bug. You go ahead, you refactor that, and it turns out that you went from right to wrong. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to mindlessly accept anything they suggest. But I guess it's a great way to just get a second opinion on your code. And in this case, what it suggests here, we're looking at that, and I would say that we're pretty competent at our jobs. There's no obvious bugs, right? You can write something obviously wrong, and it may be able to find that. One other way that this Copilot Chat could really help you is in writing unit tests. So let's take a look at a few functions that we have here. So I have create journal notes. I also have create journal MD. All right. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to write some unit tests for each of these functions. So let's start by that. Let's say write unit tests for the read journal MD function. It says, sure, here's an example unit test for the read journal MD function. So it gave me this import OS, import temp file, import unit test, and from journal import read. Now here it basically this is not going to be correct if you don't extract this into its own file, into its own directory, making it a module by adding a init.py. So you will need to do all of that. But suppose you did all of that. Let's take a look at the test. Here's a test case. It tries to read a file. If the file is successfully read, and in order for it to read a file, it has to create a temporary file. So it goes ahead and create a temporary file. It says write, and then write, that's W means write. So it just create a random temporary file, and then it writes into the temporary file some random text. And this random text will look like H1 header. It says my journal, and then this is a test journal, and then some pipe. This is a desired text. So it's adding this pipe for me because it's very intelligently sensed that if I'm going to write a unit test, I'm probably going to test a feature to make sure that I can extract the letters after the first pipe. So it needs to add some content into the markdown, and it adds the pipe in there so that it can handle the pipe cases later on. So it's pretty smart, okay? And then it says that this is the setup. So before any test is run, do the setup. Then after everything is done, do the teardown, meaning remove the temporary file. So you don't need to keep the file after the test anymore. You're just creating a temporary file, you perform your test, and then you tear it down after the test routine is done. All right. So this is the test itself. And it says, if I were to call the read journal MD, so I'm going to name this. Oh, actually, this is correct because I did name it journal.py. So I could turn this into a module very quickly by adding an init.py, put this in the directory, and then it says from journal import this. If this works out, then it will be able to call the read journal, and then it will do an assert equal. It says that take the last line and check that the last line will be this is the desired text. Why? Because it means that you're getting this thing which is after your pipe character. So if all of that code works, if all of this code works, if this functionality works as you expected, then you should expect that given an input like this, the output should be like this. So this is the assert equal. And so on and so forth, right? I'm not going to explain all of this. If you want to learn about unit tests, I have videos talking about unit tests and helping you write your own unit tests on the YouTube channel. You should go and look for them. So I'm not going to go into the unit tests here, but I want to comment on how reasonable a job is doing. You can turn this into its own new file. You can run this in the terminal. You could copy that, so on and so forth. It gives you a follow-up question. How do I use the unit test module to test my Python code? So this is more generic, but it tries to help you with that. It says if you're trying to ask for help regarding a Python module, maybe he can help you with this. And I don't know why I use he. I just assume his gender, but maybe it's a she. But truly, the biggest life hack of this all, you ready? It's to generate doc strings and add typings to your code. So I could also, let me take a look at all of this code. I have a few functions here, right? And notice that my functions are very simple. The signature is very simple. So I could ask it to add doc strings to illustrate the usage patterns and add typings to all of the functions. So I'm going to say add doc strings to all the functions, illustrating usage pattern, and then add typings to the functions signatures. So let's hit enter. This is going to be exciting. Certainly, here's an updated version of the read journal MD. Before that, I have the usage pattern. This is a doc string. This is okay, but this is a better doc string. It gives you the arguments, it tells you what it returns, it tells you the description. This is more PEP 8 compliant, right? It tells you this is a read in a markdown formatted file and extract of text from the first P. And then this is the arguments that you should expect. So there is a one file path, the path to the markdown formatted file, and it returns what the extracted text, or none if no matching P tag is found. And it also adds typing. You see that there is optional, and then there's a string. So this is the output of that, right? So this is the input is a file path, that's a string, and then the output, optionally, why optional? Because it could be none, right? But if there is something, it would be a string. So that's what this typings is doing. Let's take a look at the second one, the create journal notes. Let's scroll down to this one. Here, there's the create journal notes. Again, I gave it a basic usage pattern. Here, I didn't even give it anything. It just added its own, right? It just added its own. This one, I gave it something, and it goes ahead and tell you that, okay, it creates a list of notes and a list of documents from all markdown. This is the argument you expect. This, again is a directory path. It has to be a string. But it returns what? It returns a tuple containing the list of notes and the list of documents. And that's actually correct. If you look at my code here, right, I return a notes, documents, and both of this, basically, this is a tuple of lists. So there is two lists in this tuple, and the first list is a note, the second list is basically pointing to the documents. So just think about this. How much time does this save? Right? Note that I added a few changes to the create journal notes function to handle the case where create journal MD returns none. I also added the string function to call to the file path argument to ensure that it's a string. So if you look at create journal MD, we didn't actually put in a try except, but here it uses a try except. It says try this, successfully return result. If not, say that found not found error, there is no path, or that is not found. And in the create journal MD, this is the one. It expects a file path, and here it calls the file path. If we look at that, comparing that to my code, create journal MD, it added the str. So it tries to, while doing this for me, it tries to add typing, it tries to add the doc string. This is what I asked for. I said add a doc string and add typings for me. It did that, but it also went to improve my code just slightly. It says, well, I'm also going to add the string around this. So instead of just file path, I want to add string file path to guarantee, to confirm that, making it a bit more defensive, a bit more predictable, and that's actually really good. I didn't ask it to do that, but it do that, and it explained that to me. It says I made a few changes to handle the case where this returns none, and also to ensure that it's a string. So that's actually pretty nice. So again, how much time does it save you? And now you don't have to expend your mental energy to do all these things like doc strings, like adding typings and stuff. You could actually reserve your mental energy for the actual problem solving and have kind of like a junior pair programmer to do all the groundwork for you. And I think it's kind of nice. It's kind of like having an unpaid intern, but with maybe more attitude and more unwarranted confidence. And I also want to say that all of this isn't only useful when you're writing code, but also when you're reading code or when you're trying to learn a language in general. So we saw how when you're reading a piece of code and you're not sure what it does, you can highlight the code, you can say highlight this, and then explain what this is doing. You can ask Copilot Chat to explain it to you. In fact, there's a shortcut for that, Control-I or /explain. We also see how you could ask it to propose a fix for the bugs in your code, or write commands, or write doc strings for your code, or add typing and then some refactoring, etc. But you could also ask it about a programming language. So for example, I code a lot in Next.js, and sometimes there is some concepts that still trips me out a little bit. For example, static path. I could say, what is a static path in Next.js? And let's see what it says. So in Next.js, a static path refers to the file directory that is served directly by the server without being processed by the Next.js framework. And this also works for less popular languages. For example, I also code in Solidity, the smart contract programming language, or the programming language for smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. So I could ask maybe, what is a modifier in Solidity? Without a lot of context here, just asking what is a modifier. Now these are questions that I used to paste into Google, right? I would ask Google, what is a modifier? But now I could just do it directly in my code editor. So in Solidity, a modifier is a special type of function that can be used to modify the behavior of other functions. And it gives you an example. Here's an example of a modifier. It checks whether the caller function is the owner of a contract or not. So here it gives you this example. It says this is a simple contract. This is a simple smart contract. But here is a modifier, and the modifier is the only owner modifier. This returns true. If the required checks out to be true, then only owner will be true. And that is a modifier. You could, the good part about this is that I said you could actually paste this into Google. You said, what is a modifier in Solidity? You ask in Google, you can scroll through a few things. In 5 minutes, you would understand all of that. Google is pretty reasonable at trying to explain concepts in programming, right? It gives you all the right files, it gives you all the right links, it gives you Stack Overflow, and all of that is great. But the thing about this is that you could follow up a question. So you could follow up this question in a way that you cannot do with Google. You ask a question, you can't hold on the question, look at the answer, and then follow up with a question. But here you can. So I can say, give me an example. Not equal to the owner address. Hit enter. Now function do something public only owner. This is something that only the owner can call this function because there is the modifier which is defined up here, which means the require would fail and this function cannot be called. You cannot transact on a smart contract calling this function no matter how much you pay for the gas fee if you are not the owner. But now it takes one step further to explain that, and it says that, okay, if the caller is not the owner, this is how you would call it, and it expects it to fail, and it says that this call will fail, this call will succeed. So all in all, it does a really, really good job at explanation, and up to this point, programmers had to put up with the nonsense, the kind of abuse they get from Stack Overflow or Reddit for asking a beginner question and then getting tons of downloads. Now you can do it right where you code. Now I want to say that this is still a very early product, it's not perfect, but is it useful? Yes. I think it's a well-designed, well-built product. And it has all the shortcuts that you expect to be there. If you put a slash here, you can see all the different examples here explained. Ask about the extension development, ask for a fix for the prompts in the selected code, help simplify, trying to simplify the selected code, test, VS Code, a lot of things here, right? These are all the slash commands, and programmers love slash commands. So you could use the arrow key as well to traverse. I could click on the arrow key and go through all of my prompt. So using the arrow key to traverse your chat history and edit your previous command, I could take this and remove this read journal, and I can say now I don't want that anymore, I want the create journal notes functions, for example. So that's a quick tour to Copilot Chat. If you are fans about it, I hope the video helps demonstrate some of the value it provides and maybe help you make a decision. If you feel like you could even save 20 minutes a week from programming with Copilot Chat, then it's already worth it. So yeah, don't be cheap, and do the right thing. See you in the next video.